This video is sponsored by the website building platform Squarespace. King Aegon Targaryen I is written as this near-perfect, almost flawless character in the lore. Not because he's some ancient figure and the singers embellished the stories shared by word of mouth. Aegon did his thing only 300 years back. He's remembered this way because he somehow conquered a continent of people who saw his family as strange outsiders that made them quickly accept his reign. 100 years before his conquest, the Targaryen family, originally from the now destroyed Valyria, settled on an island called Dragonstone and established themselves as lords over some fisherfolk. A castle was already built here by the Valyrians as a western outpost for trade, and it kinda resembled their homeland Valyria with the volcano being here. Very little changed by the time Aegon came into power as the house's new lord, but this young new Targaryen lord was ambitious. He bonded with the largest of the family's dragons, named Balerion. Balerion outlived all the other dragons that migrated from Valyria to Dragonstone. Aegon's older and younger sister's dragons all hatched on this island. Aegon decided to put Balerion to work at the end of something called the Century of Blood. For some undisclosed reason, he decided to take part in some fighting over east on Essos that had nothing to do with Dragonstone. After Valyria blew up, a huge power vacuum opened up because the Valyrian Dragonlords were on their way to taking over the world. Valyria's first colony established thousands of years back, the powerful city of Volantis thought it would be a good chance to try and suck up all of Valyria's former land. A couple of the free cities fighting them back, asked Aegon for some backup. All we know is that he agreed and succeeded in fending Volantis off. The Targaryens were one of the ruling dragonlords in Valyria, as minor as they might have been compared to the other bigger players. Maybe Aegon didn't like to see Volantis trying to replace his motherland and adding a lot of bloodshed to the Century of Blood. The Targaryens, including Aegon and the lords for him, never showed any interest in conquering desirable land in Essos after the doom of Valyria. Aegon helped and just went back home. No mention of any exchange for his dragon power. But it's clear he learned a life-changing lesson, how weak others were compared to dragon riders. Back on Dragonstone, he had the iconic painted table made, a 50-foot slab of wood in the shape of Westeros. Every detail was painted on it. So Aegon had eyes on Westeros long before many realized, years before officially kicking off his conquest. Aegon's reasoning for conquering an entire continent is a little random. By the time he was 25, Westeros was a very hostile place. The main perpetrators for this was two power-hungry kings. Just across the waters from Dragonstone, Lord Aegon's neighbor was the aging Storm King of House Durrandon, ruler of the Stormlands. The Storm Kings of House Durrandon are an ancient family going back thousands of years, and at their peak ruled the eastern half of Westeros. But by 2 BC, their land and power had dwindled, and had been dwindling for a long time. Storm King Argylic Durrandon, aka Argylic the Arrogant, not only wanted to stop it, but had plans to reverse it. But his plan solely revolved around Aegon and his dragons. The Kings of the Reach had nibbled at the Stormlands domains from the west, the Dornishmen harassed them from the south, and Harren the Black and his Iron Men had added pressure from all around them. King Argylic was no pushover though. Like Aegon, he participated in the resistance over at Essos against Volantis for whatever reason. We don't know if he and Aegon had any past interactions fighting together, but it's possible. Argylic also killed the King of the Reach some years back in his younger days. The Stormlands, the Reach, and Dorne have historically been at each other's throats over each other's lands, but now a new player had approached from the seas to the west. King Harren the Black. Recently, the Ironborn, led by House Hoare, invaded mainland Westeros to completely take over the Riverlands. Don't worry if you don't recognize the name Hoare. They're all extinct by the start of the main story. King Harren was by far the worst ruler in the Seven Kingdoms during this time period, but he had hyper-focused on building the largest castle for his house in his family's newly acquired land. Thousands died to build his dream castle he would call Harrenhal over 40 years. When it finally neared completion, the Storm King Argylic began sweating. He had no chance fighting the King of the Isles and Rivers. No king in Westeros was more feared than Black Harren, whose cruelty had become legendary all through the Seven Kingdoms. And no king in Westeros felt more threatened than Argylic, an aging warrior whose only heir was his maiden daughter. So out of desperation, though he didn't show it, he approached Lord Aegon Targaryen with a deal. The married Lord of Dragonstone his daughter to marry in exchange for backup against Harren the Black, and Argylic would throw in some land for Aegon too. Some land that didn't currently belong to the Stormlands, however. Before getting into all the details, let me thank the channel's sponsor, Squarespace. If you have a website in mind, check out squarespace.com/whycreate to take advantage of all their pre-built and customizable templates to make your life easier. After you've built something that matches your brand, there's tools here for you to set up an e-commerce site, blog, or even a portfolio. All backend analytics are here to check how everything's performing too. Start your free website trial if you plan ahead with building. Then, when you're ready to launch your site, go to squarespace.com/whycreate to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Argylic was dumb and ballsy enough to offer lands that were under the King of the Isles and Rivers. Aegon pointed out that he already had 2 wives, his older and younger sister, and did not need a third. He also didn't fail to notice and bring up that the land had belonged to House Hoare for more than a generation now. King Argylic had disingenuous reasons for this. It wasn't just a simple scam. If Aegon were to accept, the Targaryens would be taking up property in an area that would serve as a buffer between the Stormlands and the Riverlands. A pretty shitty thing to do to someone you're asking for help. So Aegon came up with his counteroffer. Aegon would take those lands for himself, plus some more desirable ones, but instead of marrying the Storm King's daughter, it would be his bastard half-brother, Loras Baratheon, to have that honor. And you know how noble bastards are looked at in the Seven Kingdoms. The suggestion of a bastard marrying his daughter enraged the Storm King, so much so that he had the hands of the messenger bringing this counteroffer to him cut off. The Storm King wrote to Aegon, "These are the only hands your bastard shall have of me." Aegon made no reply, and instead summoned his allies, the main ones being House Velaryon, another family originating from Valyria. Neither the Targaryens or Velaryons had numbers to build a suitable army, but they complemented each other nicely. The Targaryens ruled and fought in the skies on Dragonback, while the Velaryons specialized in sailing. While thinking of how to respond to the Storm King's act, Aegon and his sister wives decided to visit their castle Sept to pray to the Seven of Westeros. This is the first mention of the Targaryens ever praying or believing in the faith of the Seven. 7 days of praying and discussing ended with a cloud of ravens leaving Dragonstone, all with the same message to the 7 kings ruling over Westeros. To the north, ruled by the Starks of Winterfell. To the Martells and Dorne, the Lannisters of the Westerlands. The Reach were ruled by the Gardeners during this time. The Arryns in the Vale, and even to the 2 most belligerent kings of Aegon's time, who unfortunately had realms closest to him. The King of the Isles and Rivers, Harren the Black, and Argylic the Arrogant. The Riverlands had yet to separate from the Iron Islands, and the Crownlands hadn't formed yet by the Targaryens near Dragonstone as their little kingdom on the mainland. That's why it's referred to as the 7 kingdoms in the story, and not 9, like there would eventually be. The message Aegon sent these lands read, "From this day forth, there would be but 1 king in Westeros. Those who bent the knee to Aegon of House Targaryen would keep their lands and titles. Those who took up arms against him would be thrown down, humbled, and destroyed." And he meant it. House Hoare and Gardener received the worst of the Dragonfire, going completely extinct. Harren's dream castle was also burned pretty badly. The Storm King, who pushed Aegon into starting this conquest, fought to the very end, never even having the chance to see Aegon's dragon. He was killed in single combat by the Targaryen bastard that pissed him off, Loras Baratheon. Loras would have more hands than the ones Argylic had cut off. He ended up marrying the Durrandon's daughter, taking over the family's line and home, forming House Baratheon of the Stormlands. Argylic is just remembered as the arrogant last Storm King. The Starks and Arryns bent the knee with minimal damage. The Lannisters felt a little dragonfire before submitting, and the Martells never bent the knee. So many lives were lost in Dorne, but they resisted long enough to kill one of the dragons, and Aegon's little sister riding it. That put bringing Dorne to the 7 kingdoms on hold for a while. For the most part, it was an overwhelming victory for the conquering Targaryens. It took 2 years to bring down all those kings. Aegon's conquest was such an impactful event that the time measurement used in the story is named after it. Before Conquest, BC, and after Conquest, AC. 297 AC is where the story begins, with those Brothers of the Night's Watch getting attacked by the White Walker. The Targaryens' near 300-year reign ended with the Mad King, who was Daenerys' father, throwing away all of Aegon's hard work to earn the people's love. The Targaryens' conquest may have started because of the last Storm King's actions, but I think enough hints are dropped that Aegon always had his eye on the western mainland. The cruel King Harren the Black growing more powerful, and Argylic just being a trash neighbor, just happened to convince Aegon some good would come from uniting this place for the first time.